When did Hermann Göring realise that the war was lost? This is perhaps a pretty obvious question to ask, and Justice Robert Jackson asked it at Nuremberg. So how did Göring respond? Göring distinguished between the point when a victorious outcome was no longer possible and the point when defeat itself became inevitable. He said he didn't believe that the war was irretrievably lost until after January 1945. For him, the critical moment was when the Soviet offensive reached the Oder River and the Ardennes offensive in the west had failed. At that point, he saw defeat approaching. Earlier, he'd hoped for a stalemate, with Germany holding positions on the Vistula in the east and the West Wall in the west, and that he hoped for new mass-produced weapons that could slow down the Allied air war. When Jackson demanded the date, Göring specified mid to end of January 1945 as the point after which he had absolutely no more hope. He conceded that, however, long before that, a successful outcome would have required a negotiated settlement. He defined success as either conquering the enemy or achieving a favourable negotiation. A draw would mean terms without victors or vanquished. But he insisted that Hitler wouldn't engage in hopeless and futile negotiations, especially once the Allies had proclaimed their demand for unconditional surrender. That declaration, Göring said, stiffened German resistance and made negotiations pointless. What about the air war? Because Göring admitted that by the time he realized defeat was inevitable, German cities could no longer be adequately defended from Allied air attacks, and he acknowledged that by January 1945 it was not possible to defend them. He stated that after January 1945 there were virtually no bomber attacks on the United Kingdom because fuel and aircraft were needed for air defence. If he had had sufficient bombers and oil, he would have continued attacks on the United Kingdom to the last minute as retaliation. On the V1 and the V2 weapons, he said that these continued as long as possible, and he regretted not having enough of them to inflict heavier losses, and therefore he believed to ease the pressure on German cities. Jackson argued that as long as Hitler stayed in power, there was no way to end the war. Göring replied that Hitler alone decided whether the war would continue or not. As long as the enemy demanded unconditional surrender and threatened harsh conditions, he would fight to the last breath in hope of some change of fortune. Asked about the German people who wanted an end to the slaughter, Göring conceded that they had no legal means to stop the war. Only revolution or assassination could change the situation. He remarked that after Hitler's death, he himself would have been Hitler's successor had events not intervened. Had the enemy demanded unconditional surrender from him as well, he would likewise have continued fighting, regardless of circumstances. He acknowledged that the 20th of July 1944 attempt on Hitler's life, and when asked about Hitler's will of 1945 naming Admiral Dönitz as Reich president, he addressed Hitler's accusation that Göring and Himmler had disloyally tried to seize power and conducted secret negotiations with the enemy. Göring insisted that he'd never betrayed Hitler and never negotiated with a single foreign soldier at that time. Hitler's final denunciation of him was based on a grave misunderstanding, perhaps due to a mistransmitted radio message and Bormann's influence. He never intended to take power illegally or act against Hitler. Nevertheless, he confirmed that he was arrested and that he expected then to be shot. Asked about the leaders, Göring had no doubt that Hitler was dead. Goebbels was dead. He said he trusted a witness who saw Goebbels' corpse, and Heydrich was definitely dead. After all, Heydrich had died nearly 4 years earlier. He was less certain about Himmler's death, but he assumed that the Allies would know since Himmler died in their custody. Bormann's fate, he didn't know either, but he presumed he was probably dead. And then he outlined those who influenced Hitler at certain times. He himself had had the strongest influence up to late 1941 or 1942. From then on to 1943, his influence declined gradually and then rapidly. Goebbels had intermittent but increasing influence, especially in the war's last years. Rudolf Hess had influence in his special sphere before and shortly after the seizure of power, but it waned and ended with his 1941 flight to the United Kingdom. Himmler's influence increased over the years, then declined rapidly after late 1944. Martin Bormann had a disastrously strong influence from about 1942 onwards, especially after the 20th of July 1944, because he was constantly with Hitler and he controlled the flow of information. Göring maintained that overall nobody has had as much influence on Hitler as he did, though that influence diminished during the war. So thank you very much for listening to this. I need to insist that these are not my opinions. These are the opinions of Göring as he said at Nuremberg. Now, I've done a number of videos on the Nuremberg Trials, and in particular I've done more on Göring than anyone else, and saying what he thought of the war and the evidence that he gave at the trial. I upload every day with a shorts video, and there are documentary style videos on Tuesdays and Fridays, and if they're not documentary style, it's me walking around showing you some historic location. I always upload at 2000 hours Central European time, as I live in Poland and in Germany, and I sometimes do live talks too. I try to be present when the videos premiere, which gives you a chance to chat in real time with me and other users. These videos feature original research, as I can speak various languages. I also offer channel membership, which costs £5 or €6 or $6, and which gives access to currently over 800 videos which are for members only. So if you're interested in real researched history made from the locations where these things happened without the use of sensationalized language or artificial intelligence, then this is the place to be. Thanks for listening.